A small plastic tube arrives in the post, anonymous, sterile. It carries no sense of history, no weight, just instructions. A swab, a seal, a barcode. The sample travels quietly from a farmhouse in Tuscany to a laboratory where everything is controlled. White light, filtered air, machines that reduce identity to sequences, letters, numbers, probabilities. Weeks later, the result returns. It speaks in the language of percentages, Southern European, Mediterranean, broad categories, familiar, almost empty. And then beneath that surface, something more precise begins to appear. A pattern, a residue, not recent, not migratory in any obvious sense. A lineage that does not drift far. It sits, it persists. In certain valleys, in quieter places, Volterra, the wooded slopes of Casentino, the signal aligns with something older, not medieval, not Roman, earlier, 2,500 years earlier. The result does not announce itself, it does not explain. It simply suggests that the genetic signature found in modern residents is not entirely modern. That something endured, not culture, not language, something quieter, bloodline. This is the unsettling beginning, because the Etruscans are supposed to be gone. Their cities were absorbed, their language fell silent, their identity dissolved into the structure of Rome. What remains of them is fragmentary, tombs, inscriptions, objects removed from context, and yet the data implies continuity. Not complete, not pure, but present. It is not the survival of a civilization. It is the survival of people without the memory of being those people. That difference matters. For centuries, the dominant explanation refused to allow this possibility. The Etruscans were too strange, too divergent. Their customs did not align with their neighbors. Their language did not resemble Latin or Greek or any known Indo-European form. So the conclusion seemed inevitable. They must have come from somewhere else. The most influential version came from Herodotus. He described a migration from Lydia, across the sea into Italy, a displaced people carrying their customs with them, foreign in origin, foreign in character. It was a compelling story. It explained the difference. And the difference was real. Etruscan inscriptions resemble Greek in shape, but resist understanding. The letters are familiar. The words are not. They sit on stone with an uncanny presence, legible, yet unreadable, as though meaning has been stripped away, leaving only form. Their language stands alone. It has been compared cautiously to fragments like Linear A from Bronze Age Crete, another script that looks almost interpretable, yet refuses translation. A ghost language, a residue of a linguistic world that no longer exists. To encounter Etruscan text is to experience divergence directly. The mind expects recognition. It does not arrive. And this strangeness extended beyond language. In painted tombs at Tarquinia, figures recline at banquets, men and women together, laughing, drinking, reclining on the same couches. Their expressions are vivid, their gestures informal, alive. The ochre walls are faded now. The air inside is cool, damp, and still. Colors bleed into stone, reds soften into rust, blues into shadow. But the scene remains, and it unsettled ancient observers. Greek and Roman writers remarked on these women, not with admiration, but with discomfort. Etruscan women appeared in public. They owned property. They attended feasts. They were named alongside their fathers and mothers. To outsiders, this was not refinement. It was excess, a sign of difference. Culture accumulated into anomaly. And yet, at their height, the Etruscans were not peripheral. They were central. Their world was organized into a network often described as the 12 cities. Independent, competitive, but bound by ritual. Once each year, representatives gathered at a sanctuary known as the Fanum Vultumnae. Its exact location remains uncertain, perhaps near Volsini, perhaps still undiscovered. It was not a capital, it was something quieter, a place of assembly, of shared identity. We do not know precisely what occurred there. The sources are sparse, but the idea persists, a federation without unity, a people without a single center. Across Etruria, cities rose on plateaus, fortified, planned, connected by roads that cut through hills and forests. Beneath them, necropolises spread outward, cities of the dead. Mirroring the living, enter one of these tombs, and the silence becomes tangible. The air holds a faint dampness, the walls close in, carved chambers open into one another, arranged like homes, beds sculpted from stone, doors that lead nowhere. The dead were not hidden, they were housed, objects remain, jewelry, weapons, painted scenes of music, hunting, celebration, life extended into death. This was not a marginal culture, it was confident, established, rooted. And yet, everything about it seemed to suggest an origin elsewhere. 19th century historians formalized that assumption. They returned to Herodotus. They sought parallels in the Eastern Mediterranean, names, motifs, Fragments of resemblance, the conclusion hardened, the Etruscans were outsiders. Even when dissenting voices emerged, such as Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who argued they were indigenous, the weight of anomaly remained stronger than the argument for continuity. Difference demanded explanation. Migration provided one. Then, slowly, the evidence began to shift, not through texts, through bones. Fragments of ancient DNA were extracted, carefully, in small quantities. Mitochondrial sequences first, then broader genomic data. The early results were inconclusive. Some appeared to support Eastern connections. Others did not. The picture blurred rather than clarified. Modern populations complicated everything because modern DNA carries layers: Roman movement, medieval migrations, trade, disease, isolation, mixing. To compare a modern Tuscan with a modern Anatolian is to compare two populations shaped by thousands of years of separate histories. The signal becomes distorted, so researchers turned further back, directly to the ancient remains themselves. And the result, when it arrived, was unexpectedly quiet. No dramatic shift, no clear influx from Anatolia. Instead, continuity. The individuals associated with Etruscan culture shared a genetic profile with their neighbors in central Italy, with the people who would become the Romans, local, indigenous. The anomaly dissolved, and in its place, a deeper contradiction appeared. Because if the Etruscans were genetically local, then why did they seem so culturally distant? Why did they speak a language that does not belong to the Indo-European family that dominates the region? Why did their identity feel like an intrusion when their ancestry was not? The answer may lie not in movement, but in survival. A linguistic layer older than the migrations that reshaped Europe, a remnant that persisted, not because it was isolated but because it endured within a changing population, a ghost that refused to disappear. And this is where the uncertainty remains. Because genetics can map ancestry, it can trace lineage, it can identify continuity and divergence, but it cannot explain identity. It cannot tell us why a people chose to remain distinct, or how they understood themselves in relation to their neighbors. The Etruscans become more elusive, not less, when viewed through this lens. They are no longer a foreign arrival. They are something more difficult to define. A local population living an anomalous culture. A familiar ancestry expressing an unfamiliar identity. And that tension does not resolve easily. The contradiction deepens when we return to the language itself. Fragments of Etruscan writing survive on stone, on bronze, on clay. Short inscriptions, names, dedicatory phrases, occasional longer texts that promise meaning but never quite deliver it. At first glance, they appear almost readable. The alphabet is recognizable, borrowed, adapted, shaped through contact with the Greeks. The characters align just enough to invite comprehension. The mind reaches for familiar sounds, and then it stops. Because the structure beneath the letters is not what we expect. The grammar moves differently. The words refuse translation beyond a limited core. Names of gods, titles, repeated formulas. Everything else remains suspended. It is a strange experience to stand before a language that looks open but remains closed, as though something essential has been removed, leaving only an outline. This is why some scholars speak cautiously of a deeper linguistic layer, not imported, not recently introduced, but inherited from a time before the spread of Indo-European speech across much of Europe, a residue. In this view, the Etruscans did not arrive speaking something foreign. They remained speaking something ancient. Their neighbors changed, they did not, or not completely. It is a subtle inversion of the original theory. Instead of migrants bringing strangeness into Italy, the strangeness was already there, waiting, persisting beneath the surface of later transformations. And yet, even this explanation is incomplete, because language does not survive in isolation. It requires transmission, community, continuity of identity, which brings us back to the tension. Genetics suggests continuity without interruption, a population rooted in place. Culture suggests divergence, a way of life that feels separate. So how do these two realities coexist? Part of the answer lies in the limits of genetic interpretation itself. DNA does not preserve culture. It does not encode language. It does not carry memory in the way we often imagine. It records ancestry, not identity. A community can absorb outsiders and retain its customs, or it can remain biologically stable while adopting new behaviors. The relationship is not fixed. This is what makes the Etruscan case so unsettling. They remind us that biological continuity does not guarantee cultural continuity, and cultural difference does not require biological difference. The two can diverge. Experts approach this with caution, because the tools, powerful as they are, remain incomplete. Ancient DNA samples are limited, preservation is uneven. Cremation practices, common among the Etruscans in earlier periods, reduce the available material. What survives is partial. Statistical models reconstruct populations from fragments. They infer patterns. They estimate movement. But they do not observe directly. There is always a margin of uncertainty, a space where interpretation begins. And within that space, debate continues. Some point to subtle signals of Eastern connection in earlier studies. Others emphasize the overwhelming evidence for local continuity. Some argue that the linguistic anomaly demands an explanation rooted in deeper prehistory. Others suggest that language shift can occur without large-scale genetic change. No single model resolves every contradiction. The mystery narrows, but it does not disappear. Instead, it becomes more precise. Not where did they come from, but how did they remain? How does a language endure when the populations around it change? How does an identity persist when its biological foundation is shared with its neighbors? The Etruscans do not provide a clear answer. They provide a case study in divergence, and then gradually that divergence fades, not through disappearance, through absorption. Rome does not erase Etruria in a single moment. It advances, slowly, methodically. City by city, Veii falls, others follow. Alliances form and collapse. Resistance emerges, then fractures. The process takes generations, and with each step, the boundaries soften. Etruscan elites adopt Roman forms. Roman institutions extend into Etruscan territory. Citizenship expands. Identity becomes layered. There is no single point of erasure. Instead, there is dilution. The language lingers in rituals, in inscriptions, in private contexts. But its domain contracts, fewer speakers, fewer uses, until eventually it slips into silence. The last Etruscan speakers are not recorded. There is no final document marking the end, no preserved voice announcing its disappearance. It simply stops. A language that endured for centuries becomes unreadable, not because it cannot be deciphered, but because it is no longer spoken. The silence that follows is complete. Rome continues, expands, transforms, it inherits, adapts, integrates. Religious practices once Etruscan become part of Roman ritual. Symbols persist, architectural forms endure, even elements of governance carry traces of their origin. But the name fades. Ravenna becomes a memory, then a scholarly reconstruction. The people remain. Their descendants move through Roman society without distinction, without recognition of difference. And this is the most effective form of erasure, not destruction. Assimilation. Rome does not remove the Etruscans from history. It incorporates them so completely that they cease to exist as a separate entity. They become part of something larger, unrecognizable within it. Yet the genetic signal persists, quietly, unnoticed, until modern analysis retrieves it again, and even then it does not restore the identity. It only reveals the continuity. This is where the story settles, in ambiguity. Because the Etruscans challenge a simple narrative of origin and disappearance. They complicate the idea that culture and ancestry move together. They demonstrate that a people can vanish in one sense while remaining in another. That identity can dissolve while lineage endures. And that what we inherit is not always what we remember. There is a tendency, when confronted with this kind of evidence, to seek resolution, to close the gap, to decide finally what the Etruscans were. But the closer the analysis becomes, the less stable that conclusion feels. Because what remains is not a clear origin story, but a layered surface, something written, erased, and written again, a palimpsest. Stand in the hills of central Italy, and the landscape appears continuous. Olive groves, stone walls, terraces cut into slopes that have been worked for centuries. The ground feels settled, familiar. But beneath it, the layers accumulate. Roman roads crossing older paths, foundations built over earlier foundations, tombs carved into bedrock that predates the cities above them. And beneath all of that, people. Generations without names, without records, without continuity in language or identity, but continuous nonetheless. The Etruscans occupy one of these layers. Not the first, not the last, a civilization that rose, defined itself, and then dissolved into another. Their cities became Roman. Their rituals were adapted, their symbols reinterpreted, their language abandoned. Yet the people did not vanish. They remained in place. They adapted. They became something else. And so the genetic evidence, when it appears, does not reveal a lost population. It reveals a continuity that was never fully broken. This is the unsettling truth, because it suggests that disappearance in history is often a matter of perception. We mark the end of a civilization when its language fades, when its institutions collapse, when its identity dissolves into another. We describe it as gone. But biologically, the story can continue, quietly, unrecorded. The Etruscans, then, are not entirely absent. They are present in a form that cannot be easily recognized, not as a culture, not as a language, but as a lineage. And that distinction matters, because DNA, for all its precision, cannot tell us what it meant to be Etruscan. It cannot reconstruct belief. It cannot recover the internal sense of belonging that defined the Rosanna. It cannot tell us what it felt like to speak that language, to participate in those rituals, to stand in those assemblies at the Fanum Voltumni and understand what it meant. It can only tell us that the people who did those things were not strangers to the land they occupied. They were part of it, which leaves us with a quieter question. Not where they came from, but how identity itself functions across time, how it forms, how it dissolves, how it can vanish entirely while the individuals who carried it continue on, transformed into something else. There is a certain unease in that idea, because it implies that much of what we think of as fixed, culture, language, belonging, is far more fragile than ancestry. That who we are in the sense we recognize can disappear completely, while the deeper biological thread continues without interruption. We become, in effect, strangers to our own past, walking across landscapes shaped by people we no longer remember, speaking languages that would have been incomprehensible to them, carrying within us fragments of their existence without any awareness of it. The Etruscans are not unique in this. They are simply visible, a case where the gap between identity and genetics has been exposed with unusual clarity. Their language stands as a ghost, their culture as a residue, their genetic signature as a quiet continuity. 3 layers that no longer align. And perhaps that is the most important part of the story, not the resolution of their origin, but the persistence of the question, because it forces us to reconsider the relationship between past and present, between what is inherited and what is remembered. It suggests that history is not a single narrative moving forward, but a surface written over itself repeatedly, each layer obscuring the last but never fully removing it, a palimpsest of human existence, and we are part of it, not at the beginning, not at the end, somewhere in the middle.